Hello, today is Thursday, May 6th, 2021. I'm Joe Schmidt from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. At TechCaliber, we have always advocated for using a lifecycle approach for your ICT contracts. And even as technologies and suppliers have changed over the years, this approach continues to work and deliver huge benefit for enterprises. So what is the lifecycle approach? Well, to explain it, I'm joined by my fellow TC2 director and a longtime buddy, Keith Cook. Hey, Keith, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Joe. It's good to be back.
Okay, how about if you begin by explaining the key components of the ICT contracting lifecycle?
Sure, I'd be happy to. In the negotiating conferences that we've hosted for years, and incidentally are restarting, thankfully, later this year, we have promoted this idea. We call it the sourcing lifecycle continuum. Now, of course, as consultants, we have a really slick graphic that depicts this continuum, but we really can't show that to you on a podcast.
Now, I helped Keith create a later version of the graphic, and it is indeed a beauty.
Yes. Anyway, in terms of a quick verbal description, picture this in your mind. Think of a circle that consists of 5 equal segments. Each of the segments depicts an integral piece of the best approach for obtaining a technology or a service, like network services. The first segment represents benchmarking. That's just an honest and objective assessment of your current pricing, SLAs, and terms, commercial terms as well as legal terms. Next, based on that benchmarking assessment, is the development of a sourcing strategy. Third is the procurement to select your suppliers. That is the sourcing event or events that the strategy dictates. The contracting phase necessarily follows the procurement. This could be either an entirely new contract for a new supplier or an extension and update of an incumbent supplier's contract. And it consists simply of documenting in a legal contract the pricing and terms of your deal. Finally, with the contract or contracts in place, it's time to implement and or manage. And I say and or because for times when a new supplier emerges or new services from an existing supplier are needed, an implementation phase is required. But if that's not the case, then the ongoing management of the current services is the priority.
Okay, so the 5 components of the life cycle are benchmarking, strategy, procurement, contract, and install and maintain.
That's right, Joe. In a nutshell, what was just described is the lifecycle approach as it relates to the sourcing of an enterprise's ICT requirements. And to be clear, this approach can be used for any technology or service. Network services, managed services, wireless, cloud, equipment, you name it, it works.
Okay, so this life cycle approach works, but are there any gotchas?
Yes, this approach is optimal, but there is a potential pitfall. So let's talk about how to perhaps avoid that pitfall. In the best case scenario, the expirations of multiple supplier contracts are roughly aligned so as to be coterminous.
Meaning that they expire at the same time.
Right. So this affords the regular chance to go to market, which is conducting a competitive sourcing event for a suite of services as opposed to a single service or technology. For example, going to market for all your network services, if you will. However, most large national and global companies don't have just one single supplier for their network services. Multiple suppliers are almost always the case. This creates the reality that over time, and due to many legitimate reasons, the timing of this cycle for any individual supplier becomes out of sync with the overall continuum for the enterprise. So, despite the fact that you may have been quite diligent over the years intentionally adhering to the tenets of this approach, you may still find yourself in a situation where the timing of your multiple service agreements have become out of sync and are unable to support this idea of going to market with a larger, more enticing set of services.
Well, okay, so what then?
Well, let's think back to this continuum for a minute. Each of these 5 segments are typically anywhere from 6 to 12 months in length, and they consist largely of tactical actions and activities. As we said, most companies have multiple life cycles to manage as well. So, in addition to paying attention to these life cycle segments, it's a good idea every now and then to take a step back maybe every year or so, and do a strategic review. That's a holistic assessment of how these multiple life cycles sit and assess if they are in sync with each other or not. And if they're not, what tweaks might be needed to regain at least an approximate alignment of these multiple circles.
All right, then. So, what are the tweaks?
There are actions that you can take to regain alignment or even set it up in the first place if you've never had it. Things like taking advantage of a term extension that's part of an existing agreement, or amending an existing agreement to help line up the expiration date with other agreements. When negotiating a new deal, keep all your other contract end dates in mind.
Okay, so having contracts be coterminous will provide some of the best sourcing leverage.
Yes, but without a regular strategic review, you won't necessarily know where you sit. And that means that you don't really know how much leverage you have or might not have.
Okay, Keith, who should be involved in this review?
Well, it's a great question. All of your key stakeholders should be involved in this strategic review. This means you need input from the network team, technical folks, operational folks, the sourcing team, finance folks, and don't forget the legal team. You may even have others, executive management, for example. But the point is to gather all stakeholders for this strategic review and assessment. And Joe, as you know, this isn't something we just present at conferences and talk about. We at TC2 have facilitated countless numbers of meetings and workshops just like this for our clients. It invariably produces a list of potential opportunities.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Now, if you would like to learn more about this ICT contracting life cycle, or maybe you have other ICT needs, please contact Keith, me, or any of our LB3 and TC2 colleagues by giving us a call or dropping us an email. You can also stay up to date by subscribing to these Staying Connected podcasts, checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.